Okay, thank you everybody for joining today. Today I'm going to be talking you through how to improve your social data collection and specifically how to write a killer social listening query. If you haven't come across Listen and Learn Research before, we are a specialist social insight agency. So what we do is we make sense of social data using both quantitative and qualitative analysis techniques to help our clients understand their audiences better and to make better business decisions. The session today is the fourth in a series of webinars which we've been running over the last year, covering how, why, and when to use social media data. What we're hoping with this series was that at the end of it, if you watch all of the sessions, you should feel equipped to either run your own social insight project or feel equipped to commission one. So the previous three sessions covered what is social insight, when to use it, when should it replace traditional research methods, and what kind of data sources are out there. If you're interested in those, please do go back and watch them. You can find them either on our LinkedIn page or on our website, listenandlearnresearch.com. And we've also released a written guide to DIY Social Insight, which you can download from our website as well if you're interested in. Today, though, we're looking at social data collection and how to write a great social listening query. Next month will be the final session in the series, and we'll be looking at how to analyze social data using both qualitative and quantitative techniques. So please do sign up for that if you're interested. So today, when I say writing a killer social listening query, what I'm talking about is being able to define your research project really clearly and collect the most relevant data in order to help you answer the questions that you need to. So a query is essentially a collection of keywords that tells a social listening tool what data to collect. If your query is rubbish, you're going to get rubbish back. So spending time upfront making your query as solid as possible is probably one of the best investments of time that you can make in a social insight project. It will determine how good the data is and then how good your analysis and final report will be. There's an art and there's a science to writing good queries, so I'll try and cover some of that today. And then all of this will lead nicely into the next session next month about how to actually analyze, synthesize, and act on social data. So before we get to the query itself, I'd like to just talk about what you need to think about when you're first starting a social insight project. Because if we want to gather the most relevant data, we need to know exactly what it is that we're trying to find out. So spending time at the beginning of a project really fleshing that out, it will save you loads of time further down the line when you're building and refining your query, when you're cleaning your data, and when you're actually doing the analysis. So there's three broad areas that it's worth thinking about. The first is purpose. So essentially start with the end of a project. What is it that you want to achieve? What does a successful outcome look like for your research project? So think about who in the business, it might be a client's business, it might be within your own business, who is going to use the insights, who needs them, how will they use them, how will it build upon existing knowledge that you have. Think as well about scope. So this is essentially what is and isn't relevant. What questions do you need to answer? So I would encourage you to try and think of what is the fundamental question for you. You know, is it how to attract new customers? Is it how to retain existing customers? Is it how to develop a product that will appeal to people? Is it how to become a greener business in a way that meets the consumers' expectations? Whatever it is, make sure that you've got a really good idea of what exactly it is that you're trying to answer. And then within that, think about, okay, so who are you interested in? What markets do you want to look at? What are the key topics or questions within that fundamental question? What will help you to answer that? And it's also worth having a think about, are there any hypotheses that you want to prove or disprove with this research? And having a really good idea of those questions, those hypotheses up front, will save you loads of time later on because you can build a query that directly collects the data to answer those questions. And then the third thing to think about is feasibility. This is really important. We never take on a social insight project unless we have checked that it's feasible first. And what I mean by that is there enough data out there? Are people actually talking about the topic which you're interested in? Is there enough data? Will you be able to get a robust sample so you can be confident in your results? And is the data actually relevant to your questions or not? Once you've got then a clear set of objectives and outcomes that you're trying to achieve, it's time to gather your data. So the quickest, the easiest way to do this is usually using a social listening tool. You can see a few logos on screen here of different social listening platforms. This is by no means a comprehensive list. There's loads of them out there. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. But what these tools do is they scan the social media landscape, and they collect and they then present to you publicly available social data. They find relevant data using a query, which is what we'll cover today. So like I said, the different platforms, different strengths, the choice of platform for you is going to be really dependent on what you actually want to use it for, how much time you want to spend actually getting to grips with using the platform. If you want something that you can more just sort of plug in, different things to think about might be, do you want to be able to gather historical data, see how attitudes have developed over time, or is it more important to just be able to see how conversations are progressing going forward in time? So for example, if you're tracking a brand or a campaign, you'll want to think about the breadth of coverage. So which data sources are the tools collecting? Do they give you what you need? Some platforms you can get much more detailed and much more refined with your queries, but it might be that for you don't need that. It's also worth thinking about how good the on-platform analytics options are. To be honest, we don't tend to use much of the platform analytics ourselves. We tend to take all of our data out of a platform and analyze it there because we can manipulate it more easily that way. But if you're tracking a campaign, it might be really useful for you to have it all in there within the platform. If you aren't using a social listening tool, the alternative is basically manually searching for and scraping data from relevant data sources. So, you'd go to Google and you'd be looking for, well, which forums are people talking about my topic in? You might be looking on Twitter and TikTok for those relevant conversations. It might save you money doing this versus having a social listening tool, but it does tend to be a lot more time consuming, and you can't be as sure that you're getting a comprehensive view of what is happening across the web. That being said, certain data sources aren't going to be covered by your social listening tool. So it might be that you want to combine a kind of a tool-based query approach with some manual scraping. So for example, a lot of tools don't have access to TikTok data at the moment, or it might be that we've been doing projects on tradespeople recently, and there's some quite niche online forums where tradespeople are active, and we've had to manually scrape data from those because they weren't covered by the tool which we were using. Okay, so the rest of the session, we're going to focus on what happens when you do use a social listening tool. So like I said, a query is essentially a collection of keywords and specifications that tells your tool what data you want to collect, so what is and isn't relevant. A lot of tools, they do have an inbuilt kind of query wizard, which can help you build a query. I guess it's like in Excel, you can click on that little button, which will help you to build a formula. But you can only build really simple formulas or queries using that option. If you want to build something that's a bit more complex, a bit more conceptual, maybe there's lots of different areas you want to explore, or it's a topic that people talk about in a lot of different ways, you are going to want to build that query yourself. If you're just trying to track a brand or campaign, the query wizard might work for you. But definitely an advocate for building the queries yourself. So it's both a science and an art to building queries. And what I mean by that, on the science side of things, you will need to understand the language of writing a query. So most social listening tools use Boolean logic. So operators like and, or, not, brackets, quotes. I'll go into those in more detail in a second, but this is what you'll have to learn to build your queries. But the language, the options available for building your queries do differ slightly from platform to platform. So you'll also need to spend some time just learning exactly what you can do with your platform. It's also worth spending some time learning the more advanced Boolean operators. And again, I'll be going to some of those in a minute. And then on the art side of things, this is more about understanding how language works. So if you think about any given topic, like if you're doing a project on how people talk about renovating kitchens, people might be talking about renovating their kitchen, kitchen renovation, kitchen renovations. But there's a whole other load of ways in which people could also talk about a topic. There might be more kind of colloquial terms like doing up the kitchen or getting a new kitchen, or people might talk about it in terms of really specific products or brands. So you need to make sure when you're writing a query that it's as exhaustive as possible so that you're not missing out on relevant parts of the conversation. It's also worth being really aware of bias. So don't assume that the way you would talk about a topic is the way that other people will talk about that topic too. And then it's also worth learning what to exclude from a query. I mean, the social conversation is so vast, there's so much noise out there. Inevitably, some of that will creep into your query when you're writing it. So learning, there's kind of certain shortcut tips and tricks that you can use for trying to cut out some of that noise, but there's also very much a process of kind of testing and refining your queries in order to make them as relevant as possible. So what does a query look like? If you've not seen one before, this is an extract from a real life query that was designed to gather conversations from people talking about their own or others' experiences with blindness or low vision. So I'm going to go into this in some detail and break it down. You'll see there are some basic operators here, so or, not, and. There's also some more complex language as well. This specific query was built in Brandwatch using Brandwatch's conventions. Most listening tools will use similar conventions, but not identical. Like I said, it's worth learning the conventions of your particular platform. So let's deconstruct this query. First of all, just to cover the basics of query writing. So these kind of basic operators that you can see on screen are kind of the building blocks of any query. It's worth getting to grips with these. You'll get to grips with them quite quickly as you start writing queries. First of all, quotation marks. Use those whenever you want to search for a specific phrase. So anything that's more than one word, like houseplant, put it in quotation marks. The and operator, quite obvious. In this example, it will search for the posts that include both the word house and the word plant. The or operator will bring you back social media posts that contain either or at least one of the words house or the word plant. The not operator, really important once you start trying to exclude things from your query to make it more relevant. In this example, it will bring you back posts which include the word house and don't include the word plant. And then finally, brackets. These are used to separate out key clauses in your query. You might also use it to nest different variables within your query. And again, I'll show an example of that in a moment. In this example, this would bring back posts which either include the words house and plant together, or they include the words both house and flowers. So those are the basics, but we can get a little bit more advanced. There's certain tips and tricks, both in some of the language which we use and the operators which we use, which will help you basically to build better, more relevant queries. So first of all, going back to that query which I showed you a minute ago, personal pronouns. So this is something which we use a lot of as an agency that does a lot of consumer research. So a lot of the time we don't want to include posts from brands and organizations in the data because we're interested specifically in what consumers are talking about. Obviously, if you want to see what brands, organizations are talking about, just don't include this. But if you if that's what you're interested in, consumer opinions, this is a really kind of quick trick to get to more relevant data, because people obviously use words like I or I'll or I'm or me, or if I talk about someone else, she or him or her, when they're posting online. Brands don't really tend to use this language. So including these pronouns means that we're getting posts where people are telling stories about their first-hand experiences. You'll also see at the end of this query, we've included the words hey, hello, hi. This is just another way of capturing posts that are from real people and not from brands or organizations. Next up, synonyms. So you'll see that this query uses multiple different terms for the same thing. So blindness, partial sight, visually impaired, low vision, all different ways of talking about the same thing. And like I said, it's really important to try and make sure that your list of keywords and phrases is as exhaustive as possible, so that you're not missing out on key parts of the social conversation that might be relevant. So it's worth spending some time to get this list right. So go back to your list of questions and hypotheses, check that the data you're collecting is going to help you answer those. It's worth reading around your topic. So going back to the kitchen renovations example, you might go to the B&Q website or the Wren website to actually look what are the different terms that people might use to talk about this space. Speak to your client or to your stakeholders and ask them what words or phrases people might use to talk about the topic. It's also worth going to social media sites. Go to Twitter and type in kitchen and see what comes back, and start making a list from those conversations. Make a note of the commonly used hashtags. So here we've got on Twitter, people will put at the end of their post hashtag low vision, hashtag vision loss, hashtag visually impaired. Make sure that you're including all these possible variations. It might also be worth thinking about how people might misspell the words, the keywords which you're using, so you're not missing out on those conversations. And then after you've built a draft query, so a first draft of a query, and you've got some data coming back, read through that data, look at how else people might talk about your topic, and then use that to go back to your query and add to it. Something that can help you when trying to build out a really kind of comprehensive list of synonyms and keywords is the wildcard operator. So the little asterisk, which you can see here at the end of partial sight, visual, at the end of partial. What this asterisk does, placed at the end of a word like this, is it brings back any posts that contain that root word. So it'll bring back posts which include the term partial sight or partial sighted, or visual or visually, or partial or partially. And that can help you essentially make sure that you're capturing as many synonyms as possible without having to write out every possible variation of a word. It is worth being careful with this operator, because it can sometimes mean that you end up with irrelevant terms in your data set. So for example, in this example, partial asterisk might bring back the word partiality, or visual asterisk might bring back visualization. So these terms are less likely to be relevant for what we're actually looking for here. But it can be a good shortcut for capturing more synonyms. Okay, the next up, near operators. So this is a good alternative to the and operator if you want to make your data basically more relevant. So you'll see in lines 2 and 4 here, the operator near and then slash and then a number. So what this does is it tells the tool to look for a keyword or a collection of keywords which is being used near to another keyword or a selection of keywords. And we do this basically to allow for the different ways in which people might talk about a different topic. So we've got sight here near loss. People might use the phrase sight loss, or they might talk about loss of sight or loss of my sight, or he or she lost their sight. All these terms mean exactly the same thing, but writing out every single variation of how people might use that language can take quite a while, and you are likely to miss something. So using the near operator gives us the flexibility to pick out all of those different iterations without having to list them out individually. But the reason we're using near instead of and, so we could just look for posts that use the word sight and the word lost, but actually you're more likely to get irrelevant posts back then, because if you think about a forum post, which can be quite long. Someone might be talking about site in one part of the post, who might be talking about having lost something in a different part of the post. And actually that post isn't going to be relevant. So including near means that the words are likely to be close enough together to actually be linked. The numbers 5 and 3 are basically saying we want you to find a post where the word site is being used within 3 words of the word loss or lost or lose. You'll also notice here that a lot of brackets have been used, and this is what I was talking about. It's not just separating out clauses here, but it's nesting different clauses like you would do in algebra or in Excel. Basically, nesting different parts of your query like this can help you to get really specific about what you're trying to find and help you filter out some of that noise. Okay, next up, exclusions. These are really, really important in terms of being able to filter out noise in your query. So in your query, you're going to need to include keywords for terms that you want to exclude. So in this example, looking for conversations about being blind, we got back loads of turns of expression which just weren't relevant. So people talking about being robbed blind or turning a blind eye or going on a blind date. So removing these terms at this stage in the query means that when you get to actually analysing your data, you're not reading through hundreds of different posts which aren't actually relevant. So again, it's worth doing a first draft of a query and then reading through the data that you've got and start making a note of all the things which you want to exclude to make it more relevant. You might also notice that there are different user accounts, authors, or different websites popping up in your results that aren't relevant. So you'll see here on line 7, we've got not site argos.co.uk. And the reason for that is because the site argos.co.uk was bringing back loads of product reviews of window blinds. Not relevant. We've also excluded the author Blast Indie Radio because they were tweeting loads of posts about a particular single, I think it was called something about being blind. So excluding different authors or sites that are muddying your data, again, just helps make your final data set more relevant. And in line 6, you'll see and not RT. This is something which we include quite often to basically exclude retweets from our data sets. So we've not got loads of duplicates. The reason we do this is that we don't want to have one person's opinion being over amplified in the data set. Sometimes you'll see thousands of retweets in your data. It might be that for a particular project, it's useful for you to know what people are retweeting and what's kind of capturing people's attention. But this is just quite a quick way of getting rid of those. I mean, it's also worth just being aware that exclusions might change over time. So if you are running a query and then 6 months later you want to see how things have changed, it's worth just looking at your data again, because it might be that there's a really topical news story, which is kind of muddying the data. Okay, and then final few bits. So when you're writing a query, there's a few things which you'll need to think about in terms of where you actually want to gather data from. So first of all is the time period. So when do you want data from? Do you only want to understand what's happening in social conversations right now or kind of going forward? Or is it useful for you to understand how attitudes have developed over the last year or two? So this decision might also be influenced by how much data you actually need and how much you want to analyze. Obviously, if you're looking at a particular campaign, you would want to set the time period to the particular campaign period. Data sources, so think about, do you only want to gather consumer conversations, or maybe you want to understand what's happening in a broader category, so you might include news sites or blogs. If you're looking for people's opinions on a particular product, you probably want to include product reviews. So it's selecting the right mix of sources to give you the most relevant data. You'll also want to think about which locations you're interested in. It doesn't have to be a country, it could be a continent, it could be a really specific region, as long as for social listening tool, obviously, can get that granular. Also think about what languages you're interested in. In some platforms, you will include these specifications in the query itself, and there's language that will help you to do that. In other platforms, you can select what you're interested in from a kind of a drop-down list. Okay, but the most important part of writing a query, and I've said this a few times, but I'll say it again because it's so important, it's to test your query, refine it, keep iterating on it. It's really unusual to get a great query right off the bat. If you're looking for something really kind of niche and specific, it might be that you can do that. But chances are there'll always be some noise in the data set that you'll want to exclude. Or as you start reading through the data, you'll notice additional terms that you could be including in your query to make it more comprehensive. In terms of measuring kind of success of a query, we tend to aim for a minimum of 50% relevancy rate. And obviously the fact that it's so low, 50% tells you how much noise there is out there that can creep into your data set. By 50% relevancy, I mean you want at least 50% of your data set to be relevant. So when you get through to analysing it, you won't spend kind of too much time reading and actually getting enough useful data as a result. If your relevancy rate is lower than 50%, think about how you can fix it. So whether that's excluding certain authors or keywords or websites that we've talked about and muddying the data. So the reason we kind of aim for 50% plus, obviously higher is better, is because we will read through all of the posts which we're analysing individually, and we can then manually mark out any that aren't relevant and exclude them from our final analysis. If you're not planning on doing that, I would recommend it. If you're planning kind of basically just looking at the on-platform analytics, you're going to need to aim for a much higher relevancy rate to make sure that when you're looking at the main keywords or the sentiment, that actually it's not just based on rubbish. And then finally, as well as refining your query, when you actually get to doing the analysis, there's a number of steps that you can take to clean your data. So that might be things like removing duplicates. It might be looking for posts that are too short to be useful, or maybe removing posts which are too long and rambly and don't tell you anything useful. You might want to exclude authors that are really active and might be biasing the data, sites that aren't relevant. And we would also always randomize the data that we're analysing. So for example, if we're looking at posts from the last year, we don't just want to see what people have been talking about in the last week. We want to make sure we've got a really good mix of posts from that time period. Okay, so finally, just to sum up a few takeaways. Do become a Boolean superstar. So spend the time learning how the language of writing a query works. Spend some time learning the advanced operators and learning exactly what it is that you can do within the platform that you're using. So it'll make your queries better. Remember, always test your queries. So do a first draft, look at the data that's come out, and then test it, and then iterate on it, and then test it again. Think about how relevant you need your data to be, and make sure that obviously you're collecting enough data to be robust and be confident in the conclusions that you're pulling out of it. And then on the don't side of things, reiterating the same point, but don't assume that your query will just work from the start. You can always improve a query. Don't assume everyone is going to talk about a topic in the same way that you do. Don't assume everything's going to be relevant. And also just, again, think about comprehensiveness. Have you included all the possible sources that might be relevant in your query? If not, obviously go back and check that. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully has sparked some ideas, been useful for how you might improve your social data collection. As always, please do get in touch if you need help with designing or running a social insight project, or if you want to do it yourself. I would encourage you to check out our guide to the DIY social insight, which you can download from the website. We've got another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks on the 21st of September, all around budget travel on TikTok. So it's an example of the types of insights that you can draw from analysing TikTok data. And then the final session in this series will be held at the start of next month, all around how to quantitatively and qualitatively analyse social data. So it looks like we're about time here, but no questions. If there is anything that occurs to anyone, any questions that you'd like to ask, please do get in touch and we can answer those. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening and have a nice day.